mistrust can be the most expensive problem a company can have. Instead of talking about the elephant in the room, we usually talk about the bomb in the room. Most of us are afraid that, especially as we start talking about DEI, that something's going to go wrong and blow up in our face. And so we look at it in a chain reaction, that organizations would generally have issues in 5 areas. The first is people problems. And part of this is because people start organizations. So people generally are bringing their problems to work. And some people say more money, more problems. I don't know, more people, more problems, especially if we do not be mindful about the rest of this chain reaction. We have people problems, and then process problems, policy problems, production problems, and then profit problems. And usually y'all are probably as CFOs having more conversations when it becomes a profit problem. By the time it becomes a profit problem, it is a really expensive problem to solve. This chain reaction is set in motion and sustained by mistrust. And so it's important that it's really more so it happens like this. It happens in a more secular fashion because people right now are trying to play hot potato and pass the bomb. Hey, is DEI only in HR? It's like, no, DEI is not just in HR. If you leave it in HR and HR does not have functional authority over everything in the organization, you're trying to delegate DEI. It's like passing the bomb, just hoping that when it explodes, you're far enough away from it. But if it explodes in your organization, it affects you in your organization. So it's important here that this is what it can look like to have a culture of inequity, a culture of mistrust, a culture of disengagement. So saying, how do we get metrics and connect it to ROI? We measure it in these 5 areas. Because a lot of people are just measuring DEI for the sake of measuring how diverse our team is. To us, that's fine to know, but if we're not connecting the dots to these problem areas, then a lot of our team will see it disconnected. And notice that these problem areas do not say things like recruiting and hiring, because that's a people problem, right? If you think about what problem happens when you have poor recruiting and hiring, it becomes a people problem. You don't have the right people in the right seats, then it creates a process problem, right? So now I'm glad that you're catching along here. Now, if we talk about, I'm just giving you a sample of a group that we just ran an assessment with. So the green score here will have y'all asked for real world examples, so I want to give you one. So for this organization, their green score is represented favorable. So these are people who answered agree or strongly agree to questions that were in the people category. The white portion of this gray area is representing neutral scores, so neither agree or disagree. And the red is answering is the disagree or strongly disagree. So I just want to give you a sense of how to read that data point there. So when we look at these 5 areas and we show the team here that here's where they're struggling. Here is where they're struggling. And for us, if we look at a metric here, because someone you're asking what metrics can we be forecasting, how do we get this team to 90s across the board? So the reason we say 90s across the board, and I'll show it to you in this way as well, is if we have this area, if you think about a tire, if your tire was lopsided like this, could you actually be rolling forward smoothly? Many organizations don't even realize that they're running lopsided, that their company, their culture is it's like a tire that's half empty. And so it's important that when we talk about going towards these 90s, we still provide room for things to not be going perfectly. We're not aiming for perfection. We're saying, what if 90% was the norm and that 10% was neutral instead of unfavorable? And that way we can account for the difficulties in the world. And for those who are asking, what types of questions are you asking to find out this? We got you. It's coming up next. So now the other piece, what I like about Culture Amp and gathering demographic data, which is why employee engagement alone is not as helpful, is you have to gather demographic data. Now I'll just show you a split. So we asked a question. I understand how pay and promotion decisions are made. You all are CFOs. I promise you this question across the board, we keep seeing this, that people do not understand how pay and promotion work in their organization. If I don't understand how pay works, why am I going to work for pay I don't understand? Including promotions, how do I get higher in your organization? So you can say, okay, this is already low. And then if we start to break it by the leaders in the organization and then by the staff, we're starting to see this is one demographic, right? Leaders and staff, we can add gender here. We could do race here or ethnicity, tenure. We start to see red hit the heat map in different ways based on the questions and how we break down the demographics. So these are some of the questions we ask in the profit area. Our organization effectively directs resources towards our organizational goals. And then our organization integrates DEI into revenue generating efforts to ensure staff members have cultural competence to appropriately serve the constituents and communities we impact. How would your team stack up in these questions? So when I tell you to measure, if some of you are saying, how do we get the numbers? This is just showing you some questions in the focus area. We ask intentional questions in all 5 of those areas I showed you of people, process, policy, production, and profit to make sure that we understand what's impacting your team and look at demographic information to then focus your attention. And that was one of the other questions you asked ahead of time. How do we focus our attention? So as we start to see these gaps, we're always focused on, first and foremost, closing the neutral. Closing the neutral, right? And then because sometimes that's through communication. You wouldn't be surprised how many people have done some great work in DEI, but they communicated it very poorly. So their team doesn't even know how things have been changing as a result of their feedback. So it's important that we start to communicate. Some of the communication can start to close the gaps for the folks who are rating neutral. Well, some people will say neutral is a passive no, but then there's people who rate active no's. And those folks are harder to win over, harder to make changes for them. So focus on closing the neutral gap, and that helps to communicate to the folks who are ready to know or strongly disagree that they are able to see that change is actually happening and it could benefit them as they include their voice in decision making. When we talk about those 5 ROIs of DEI, when we give people a chance to invest their individuality in our organization, we can put out the people fire and we get those higher levels of engagement and their involvement. When we give people a chance to invest their intelligence into our processes, we get innovation. When we give folks a chance to invest their integrity into our policies, we get infrastructure because people actually follow the policies we put in place. And we give folks a chance to invest their leadership into our production, how we serve our clients, then we give them a chance to make that meaningful impact. And so do we as an organization. And we give folks a chance to invest in their livelihood, then we can put the bomb out altogether because people are more likely to invest in our organization. And we see this with even as little as 2 months of investment in having intentional DEI strategies. We can get 18% increase in customer retention, 19% in income and operating income, and then 28% increase in earning growth. Now, this is what we would call infinite wealth, where you have that combination of both employee and customer lifetime value, because the impact that you make on people's lives is beyond anything that we can measure, but we can also track it financially and through our culture. This is what we call the 5 ROIs of DEI.